But first, we have crossed a threshold tonight in the history of digital communication and the manipulation and theft of digital communication. Everything changed tonight because someone who has had his digital communication stolen decided to stand up to the thieves and say, you cannot hurt me with what you have stolen from me. And it took the richest man in the world to do that. We live in an age where public figures like movie stars have had their digital communication hacked and private photographs distributed publicly. We have seen North Korea attack a movie studio, steal and publish all of its emails because North Korea didn't like a movie that the studio made. We have seen reputable newspapers publish the emails that North Korea stole from that movie studio. We have seen reputable newspapers publish emails that we now know were stolen by Russia from Hillary Clinton's campaign. We have seen journalism adrift for years now in an ethics-free zone, presuming that stolen digital communication is newsworthy. And none of the victims of these digital thefts have known what to do about it except to suffer the pain of the exposure of their private communications. And then came the National Enquirer, which obtained stolen communications to and from Jeff Bezos. And Jeff Bezos said no more. Jeff Bezos became the richest man in the world because 24 years ago he had an idea that became Amazon. He is now the owner of the Washington Post. And tonight, Jeff Bezos did the bravest thing you can possibly do when confronted by people who have stolen digital communication. Instead of surrendering to what he now calls their attempts at extortion and blackmail, Jeff Bezos has published a letter, a statement, in which he details what has been stolen from him, the embarrassing material that's been stolen from him. And in the process, he condemns the National Enquirer for its gangster-like approach to him and to their coverage in general. Jeff Bezos published a statement tonight in which he said, rather than capitulate to extortion and blackmail, I've decided to publish exactly what they sent me, despite personal cost and embarrassment they threaten. Attached to his statement were a series of written exchanges between people working for the National Enquirer and Los Angeles attorney Martin Singer. Dylan Howard, who is an editor of the National Enquirer, sent an email to Marty Singer describing every stolen photograph of Jeff Bezos that the National Enquirer now possesses. In the last line of the email, Dylan Howard says, I hope common sense can prevail and quickly. The common sense that Dylan Howard and David Pecker, who runs the National Enquirer, wanted to prevail was that Jeff Bezos' team of investigators, led by Los Angeles security expert Gavin DeBecker, the leading security expert in Los Angeles, would stop saying that the National Enquirer is a politically motivated publication, which the National Enquirer has repeatedly proven itself to be. It is a politically motivated publication. Also attached to Jeff Bezos' statement tonight is a letter from a lawyer in New York named John Fine. He is the Deputy General Counsel of the company that owns the National Enquirer. This is an email to Martin Singer, the lawyer in Los Angeles. And it is an email that could end John Fine's career as a lawyer if it is adjudged to be, as Jeff Bezos says, an attempt at extortion and blackmail. John Fine's email to Marty Singer demands that Jeff Bezos and his team publicly state that, quote, they have no knowledge or basis for suggesting that American media's coverage was politically motivated or influenced by political forces. And in exchange for that statement, the letter says the National Enquirer agrees not to publish, distribute, share, or describe unpublished texts and photos. And then John Fine's email says, in the case of a breach of the agreement by one or more of the Bezos parties, American media is released from its obligation under the agreement and may publish the unpublished materials. So that is attorney John Fine putting a threat in writing, written in New York, sent interstate to a lawyer in Los Angeles, possibly incurring federal criminal liability on the way in an extortion scheme. And Jeff Bezos decided he was not going to take it. In his statement tonight, Jeff Bezos wrote, if in my position I can't stand up to this kind of extortion. How many people can? These communications cement American media's long-earned reputation for weaponizing journalistic privileges, hiding behind important protections, and ignoring the tenets and purpose of true journalism. Of course, I don't want personal photos published, but I also won't participate in their well-known practice of blackmail, political favors, political attacks, and corruption. I prefer to stand up, roll this log over, and see what crawls out. We have hurried to assemble the experts on this subject that you really need to hear from tonight, from a journalistic and legal perspective, including someone who spent 28 years at the National Enquirer. We have the people who can answer every question about this story as it stands now and as it is developing at this hour. We're joined by Manuel Roig Franzia, who has been in the awkward position of covering this story for the Washington Post, which is owned by Jeff Bezos, and has been covering it thoroughly and professionally. Also, Tim O'Brien is with us. He's the executive editor of Bloomberg Opinion. He has written a book about Donald Trump, studied Donald Trump's relationship to David Pecker, who runs the National Enquirer. And Joyce Vance is here to cover the legal points for us. She's a former federal prosecutor and an MSNBC legal contributor. And we're joined by Jerry George, who spent 28 years at the National Enquirer, including as the Los Angeles bureau chief. And Jerry George, let me start with you. Has David Pecker ever been up against anyone like Jeff Bezos before?
No, I think for the first time, David Pecker has met his match. We have finally gone through the looking glass, and we are way beyond yellow journalism. We are now in the area of the RICO Act. This is extortion.
Yeah, Joyce Vance, let me go straight to you on the legal points here, because there is so much in here. Jeff Bezos is very clearly saying this is extortion, this is blackmail. I read that email from a lawyer in New York to Marty Singer in Los Angeles, and I've never seen an email quite like that from lawyer to lawyer.
It really looks like our common understanding of what blackmail is, this kind of a threat. At federal law, there's a family of crimes under this umbrella of extortion and blackmail. But what they consist of, sort of their core, is this notion that AMI would have to try to threaten, in this case, Mr. Bezos, into giving up some property in exchange for AMI not doing damage to his reputation by releasing these photos. The legal fight is over whether what Bezos is being asked to give up is actually property, as the law defines it. But there could well be other crimes here. There could be hacking. There could be receiving stolen property, other crimes we don't yet know enough to perceive here. It really looks, I think, as everyone agrees, as though there's something here that's not right. And
there's two other jurisdictions involved here. There's New York State law that could have been violated by that lawyer. New York State bar procedures could have been violated. He could risk disbarment in New York State for this. And then there's California criminal liability that can be slightly different from New York's, Joyce. So there's plenty of things to study here legally.
That's right. There's federal law, there's state law, there are ethical obligations for lawyers. There is a lot that I think we'll be looking at over the next few days and weeks.
Manuel, no one's been covering this story more thoroughly than you have at the Washington Post, and I just want to ask you at the top, what has Jeff Bezos had to say about your coverage of him, the owner of your newspaper?
We have no idea. We haven't spoken with Jeff Bezos, and he hasn't been involved at all in our reporting. But we have spoken extensively with his security consultant, and he's provided us with some very interesting insights into the backstages of this whole drama, including the investigation that has taken place in which they have begun to believe, the Bezos camp, that this publication by the National Enquirer might have been politically motivated. I would just add one other thing. You mentioned hacking at the top of the show. Gavin DeBecker told us that he does not believe that Jeff Bezos's phone was hacked. He thinks it's possible that a government entity might have gotten hold of his text messages.
And Jerry George, let me just go back to you, because as the Los Angeles bureau chief, I'm sure you know of Gavin de Becker as I do. You may know him as I do. He is the person who people in Los Angeles turn to for security, for their own personal protection. He has a very large firm. He provides all sorts of services. He's been doing this for a long time. There's no one I'm aware of in the country, in the private sector, with more experience and resources in knowing how to handle an investigation like this.
Well, Gavin has had the reputation of being the best in the business for the past 25 years. So his involvement alone bespeaks a major concern.
Yeah, and Tim O'Brien, you've been studying Donald Trump's relationship to David Pecker, who runs National Enquirer. The idea that they were trying to, in effect, as Jeff Bezos says, extort out of him a statement that the National Enquirer does not have a political agenda.
Right.
I mean, there's no one who could possibly sign their name to that statement. It is the most corrupt publication in America.
You know, two things I think worth pointing out here. Jeff Bezos, the National Enquirer already published a piece about Jeff Bezos and his extramarital affair, which relied on stolen personal property.
Yes.
Whether it was a federal agency that intercepted it or it was a hacker, information was stolen and put to use. Jeff Bezos launched an investigation to find out what happened. Then the National Enquirer says to him, "We are going to use more stolen information to prevent you from continuing an investigation of how we used previously stolen information to embarrass you." The second thing going on here is, of course, there's politics at work here. David Pecker has a long-standing relationship with Donald Trump. The National Enquirer has reportedly buried years of different stories about Donald Trump that contained embarrassing information about him. We know more recently, obviously, that Pecker was involved with Trump's attorney, Michael Cohen, to bury stories about Trump's relationships and sexual liaisons with Stormy Daniels and another woman. Pecker is cooperating with the federal government in that investigation. He weaponized, prior to that, the National Enquirer's coverage in aid of Donald Trump's candidacy. That, in and of itself, is political. So when they say to Jeff Bezos, it's time to stop looking into this, and it's also time for you to say there aren't politics involved, they know on the face that both of those things are false fronts. And Bezos has the resources and the temerity to say, no, we're not going to do this.
And Jeff Bezos is, by Donald Trump, a declared enemy of Donald Trump. So there is always a political agenda with the Enquirer.
Not just Bezos, but the Washington Post and Amazon.
The entire newspaper, yeah. And Manuel, to go back to the Washington Post coverage of this, and Jeff Bezos makes the point tonight in his statement that there's a Saudi connection to this story. He says the Post's essential and unrelated coverage of the murder of its columnist Jamal Khashoggi is undoubtedly unpopular in certain circles. There is also some reporting indicating that the National Enquirer, the company, has been trying to obtain Saudi financing, and so that they have an interest in making life difficult for Jeff Bezos and hoping they can possibly also influence Saudi coverage in the Washington Post.
Well, it's quite plain from looking at Jeff Bezos' letter that he published tonight that he's interested in what would be described as the Saudi angle. Whether that ends up developing and becoming a major part of the story, I think it remains to be seen. But at this point, it's still in the formative stages as far as this trajectory of this scandal.
Jerry George, knowing David Pecker, knowing the company the way they operate, they're in need of money, they're in need of financing, they're looking for Saudi financing. What would they be willing to do to try to help the Saudis in terms of their coverage in, say, the Washington Post?
Well, I've mentioned earlier that the special issue that they put out in the spring, touting Saudi as the new Magic Kingdom, was suspicious in itself, in that 3 months later they acquired enough money to procure their biggest competitor. But I might add that, as much as the world knows Bezos as the world's richest man and the founder of Amazon and the owner of the Washington Post. To Enquirer readers, Jeff Bezos isn't really a name. Jeff Bezos doesn't really warrant the kind of cover that the Enquirer gave him. They splashed a story on this marital affair, and I doubt if 10% of Enquirer readers even know who he is. So, I mean, I think that was suspicious in itself.
Manuel, where does the story go from here?
I think we'll keep digging. We'll approach it like we do every other story. We'll ask everybody questions, and we'll find out every piece of information that we can. As they say, we'll turn every page, every single page.
Manuel, Roy Franzia, Jerry George, Tim O'Brien, Joyce Vance, thank you all for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it.